What is the scariest story you know that is 100% true? The story of Jane Kloss is terrifying. In rural Wisconsin last year, a 14-ish-year-old girl went missing after her parents were murdered in their home. Police arrived within 4 minutes or so, but she is just gone. Of course, speculation is that she was kidnapped, or that she was in on it, or dead, or whatever. Nobody knows because she has completely vanished. 88 days later, in the dead of a northern Wisconsin winter, she runs out into the street to a woman walking her dog. She had been held captive about 40 minutes from her home. All of that is scary enough, but here's the terrifying part. She had never had any contact with the guy that murdered her family and abducted her. One day he was driving to a new job, at which he only lasted a day, and saw her get on the school bus. At that moment he decided that he was going to take her. There was no warning, no grooming. There was absolutely nothing that she or her family could have done to avoid everything. A creepy young man saw her from 100 foot away and decided that he would murder her family and take her for himself. The fact that he just did this so randomly is bizarre and also lucky. He probably had ideas of this in his head, but no concrete plans. At least he was not another Joseph Fritzl. That man diligent, intelligent, smart, and hardworking meticulously planned the kidnapping and imprisonment of his daughter for years. For decades she was held prisoner along with some of her children. He was only caught when he let one of his children with his draught ear go to a hospital for some reason. He then let his daughter free and go to the same hospital to talk to staff. Her daughter was in such a horrible state that she was threatened with a potential charge if she did not tell them what happened to her. She was taken at 18 and allowed to go to the hospital at 44. They said she looked apple years older and both her and her daughter had pale skin and looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in decades. This Wisconsin story is very bizarre. I lived alone with my dogs in a brownstone in a gated community in uptown Dallas. I worked a few miles away, but came home every day for lunch to let my dogs out. After living there for about a year I started smelling men's cologne really strong in my entryway and up my stairs. I figured it was my neighbor next door and didn't think anything of it. Then one day I found a dollar bill folded lengthwise on top of my purse. I never carry cash, nor have I ever folded a dollar bill lengthwise. Thought it was weird. A few weeks later I came home, and both my dogs were standing in front of my bedroom door wagging their tails and staring at the door. I figured they wanted to lay on my bed, but I was in a hurry and walked them real fast and went back to work. When I came home, that day there were 20 or so dollar bills folded lengthwise and placed neatly around various surfaces in my room. Never in my life have I been so terrified. I grabbed my dogs and noped the fuck out of that place as fast as I could. I called the cops. They came out, my locks were changed, but I could never be there alone again. I moved a month or so later. When I moved, I found dollar bills taped to the back of pictures on my walls, under furniture, and random places. I never figured out who or why or even how. I think the scariest thing of all is knowing that day, when I was home, whoever had been going into my house was waiting quietly in my room, folding dollar bills, and my little dogs knew it. I was probably 11 or 12. There was a telephone pole in our backyard that stood in the middle of our back fence. An electrician was working on it and needed access to our backyard for a couple days. One of the nights, my best friend was over for a sleepover, and we were in the fort we made in my room. I was facing toward her, away from my bedroom door, and she gets startled, and let's put kind of a howl-footed scream/yelp. She said she thought for a split second she saw a man's face peering between the sheets through the entrance to our fort. We both felt really creeped out the rest of the night, but just fell asleep eventually. The next day or so my family realized that 2 of our motor scooters we kept in the back were missing, and sometime later my dad recognized the electrician on Sacramento's Top 10 Wanted. I'm pretty sure that night was the night he stole the scooters and he must have come inside the house through the back door and left or something when he realized we were awake. I was walking in the woods once when I saw a blue tent, or what had once been a tent. It was torn to shreds and the poles were snapped, and it was all in a messy pile in the middle of a clearing. From a distance, it had looked like this clearing was full of cream-colored flowers, but as I got closer I realized they were pieces of paper. Pages from Stephen King's The Shining. to be precise. They were charred around the outside, as though someone had set light to them, and the fact that they were individual made it look like someone had really wanted to destroy the book. I shrugged it off. It was a very neat setup for whatever project the film students from the nearby school would be making, I told myself. Very well done, guys, very creepy. It made the news shortly afterwards that a man from the next town over who had been missing for a long time had finally turned up, dead, in his blue tent in the woods. I don't know if he was still in there when I walked past. I don't want to know. My uncle, when he was in his teens, witnessed a UFO event. He was at the beach in the middle of the day when he saw an oval-shaped object about half a kilometer up in the sky. He said that everyone, there were over 100 other people at the beach, and they all witnessed this, could see that the object was huge, big enough that, if it had come down, it rolled flat in the entire beach. Everyone watched it for about half an hour, and during that time it didn't move one bit. Heaps of people were just standing or sitting around, watching it. My uncle said, and this is an almost direct quote, "You know how you sometimes feel like you just have to get out of a place, like you have to take off running? Well, this was different. You felt the opposite, like you had to stay." After half an hour, the object started moving very slowly, and then it just shot sideways extremely fast and disappeared. No plane or human-made flying object cold moved in that way, or looked like that, unless the government was/is developing technologies we know nothing of, a strong possibility. My first girlfriend's house was probably haunted. It was a newer house built late 80s early 90s which used to be woods in Connecticut. This happened in 2001. We were having an after-school snack in her kitchen when she told me she had previously seen an old man with a large white beard sitting in her living room. I laughed it off, since the house was so new and the property firmly being woods meant it couldn't possibly be haunted. A few weeks later, similar situation with her in the kitchen and me returning from the bathroom. As I walk into the kitchen, I see a man in her dining room sitting at the head of the table. I don't see a beard, but it was an old man. Me trying to be as scientific about it. Deny what I saw, since my GF gave me enough information my mind could be playing tricks on me. Fast forward a few months. The whole thing is basically forgotten, and we didn't have any other encounters. She had a friend visiting from Brazil. Her friend was downstairs next to the living room while my GF and I are doing our thing upstairs. All of a sudden her friend burst through the door crying. She asks in Portuguese what happened. She goes on to explain I was downstairs tending to music with my headphones in when I turned the corner to go into the living room and basically ran into this old man with a long white beard. I know my GF wouldn't have told her because we both didn't take it too serious. I know I didn't say anything since her friend barely spoke English. To this day I still want to write the new owners of the house if they encountered the white bearded man. When I was 11 or 12, the dream catcher I'd had since I was little broke. Not a big deal. I wasn't really attached to it, but it felt weird not to have anything on hook in my ceiling. My mom took me to a market a couple days later, and we found a ceiling decoration, not a dream catcher or anything, just some cheap crystals and beads, but it was pretty. I hung it above my bed when we got home, and that night I was woken up somewhere around midnight by footsteps outside of my bedroom. They went past the side of the house and eventually faded out, but I never heard the gate open. I didn't really think anything of it, but it happened again. Every single night without fail, between 10 PM and midnight, I would hear footsteps. They sounded heavy, like a guy in work boots, and they always went up the side of the house and faded without gates being opened on either side. It got to the point that I couldn't fall asleep until I'd heard them for the night. About a month later, I realized that they had started on the same night I hung the decoration up in my room. I took it down immediately and buried it in my closet. I never heard them again. Well, I'm into true crime, so I've heard a lot of messed up shit, but the most recent story that sticks with me as particularly horrific was a crime where a sadistic mentally ill man killed his girlfriend by spraying ceiling foam into her mouth. There was so much of it that they found the foam all the way from her mouth and down into her stomach. She was alive when he did it and choked to death as the foam expanded inside her and blocked her airways completely. Honestly, one of the most fucked up crimes I've ever heard of. Then there's of course also the story of Jun Lin, who became Luca Magnotta's first human victim. No, and Junko Futura. That one broke my heart. I cannot believe how anyone could do to a human being what they did to her.